This is my first time trying to read a creepypasta to you all. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and no matter what you think, I'm probably going to keep doing more of these. I just want to know what you guys think about this. Comments. Just tell me what you think about the story. The story is called My Nightlights Kept Bringing Monsters. Written by physical_sky_8721 on Reddit. Here we go. Folks who visit me invariably ask about how dark my apartment is. I flip on the overhead lights to ease their minds, but rarely ever explain the truth to them. I'll just say I'm sensitive to light, or I've always enjoyed the dark more than the light. They drop it, but already their words have brought to mind the scariest 5 years of my life. I was dating at the time, and I expected. She made passing comments about how dark my apartment was. My response at the time was a quick joke about secretly being a vampire, and we laughed. For the random nights she spent at my place, the darkness was fine. When I slept over at her apartment, I'd have the hardest time drifting to sleep. Her night lights, dim light, creeping around the floor, attracted my eyes in ways that I wasn't used to. I would wake up from restless sleeps, and when pressed, I told her it was the light. My parents raised me to enjoy the dark, so the light distracts me and keeps my mind working overtime. She said the same thing about the darkness in my apartment. If we were going to make this work, one of us would need to give in. Eventually, I was the one who worked on making those changes. I started at my place by leaving a light on a few rooms away, letting just a sliver of light dance into my room at night. The longer I practiced, the closer I could bring the light until there was a nightlight in my room and another just down the hall. Further helping me, I made sure they were nightlights sensitive to the dark. That is, there was a sensor that would control how much light they gave off, depending on how dark the area was. This allowed for ambient moonlight to keep the nightlight from full intensity. Just real quick, sorry guys if I am stuttering. I have not read this before, and my brain's trying to fill in blanks and stuff. Some of this may not actually be exactly the same. Anyway, back to the story. She noticed the light, and that was when the plans for living together took shape. It only took a couple of months before she moved in. Her nightlight, with a slight cover as a compromise to limit its brightness, was placed in the bedroom. My two nightlights were placed in the bathroom just beside our bedroom and the hallway. With this setup, she fell asleep as soon as her head hit the pillow, and I could follow within a half hour. On the darkest nights when my lights would be shining their brightest, I learned that throwing in an ear pod and putting some dark rainy sounds was all I needed. One moment, guys. And we're back. Alright, let's go back to the story. It took 2 years before we noticed anything strange happening with my lights. Through neither of us were sure nothing happened during those first 2 years. Just one morning, my girlfriend said over breakfast, "Your light was acting weird last night." In what way? I had to get up for some water, as I walked it by, it got brighter. You know my shadow, but as soon as I passed it, it didn't dim immediately. And then, as I came back to bed, it brightened before I would have even gotten to it. I don't know. Maybe it's just oversensitive. I'll keep an eye on it. Wake me up if it happens again. You like your sleep? For you, I will wake up. She smiled. It was a good time in our relationship. 2 nights later, she woke me up. It's still bright. Groggily, I sat up and looked to the hall. The light seemed too bright for what normally comes out through the windows. Maybe a cloud is passing over them, or over the moon, or something, I said while getting out of bed. Of course, as soon as I stood up, the nightlight returned to its normal level. See, just a cloud or cover or something. The rest of the year, that's all we thought it was. Just clouds covering the lights at weird moments. By year 3, though, it was happening in the bathroom as well. We kept that door mostly closed, but there was very little to mess with the light sensor for that nightlight. Even so, we saw it fluctuating. After the first night of it, I changed the bulbs, thinking maybe that was finally giving out. That night, though, the light fluttered like crazy, as if someone was passing their hand over the sensor bar and making it pitch black, then returning the ambient light, then back to black, and so on and so forth. Finally, the light stopped fluttering, but just about 30 seconds later, the time it takes to move from the bathroom to the hall nightlight brightened. We stared at each other. What does this mean? Is there someone in the house? I don't see anyone. Should we call someone? Who would we call? Whether it was nerves or just an automatic response, we looked at each other and said, Ghostbusters? And giggled. The tension was cut for that evening. A couple of nights later, the same thing happened. We stared at the brightening light, watched it dim, watched the hall nightlight brighten, and held the blanket up to our chins. We shivered the rest of the night, despite the sweat from the warm blankets. The night after, we started to expect the weird phenomenon to occur again. The return to normalcy was distracting us more than the weird fluctuations we expected to see. A flutter of a nightlight had one of us poking at the other and pointing, but nothing like the night before. Over breakfast, bleary-eyed, we wondered if this was limited to those 2 lights, a defect of sorts. My girlfriend thought getting more could solve the problem, and also maybe show us if it's only those 2 locations where this happens. I was less certain. Do you want to invite this phenomenon further into the house? It's already in our bathroom and hallway. We don't know that. Those are just places we've seen it. And that's enough for me. Despite my protests, with a weak power strips were daisy-chained throughout the hallway with multiple light-sensitive nightlights plugged in. As if called, we saw something the very night these strips were plugged in. I was on the couch, angry at the addition of the nightlights. My head was turned as far away from the hallway as I could get, but even so, I could still tell when the hallway brightened. It started from the area closest to me and walked down to the bedroom. Did you see that? My girlfriend yelled, and then, it's in the bathroom. Her voice was at that line between frightened and excited. I couldn't speak. It just left it. But she didn't need to say anything, because I could see the nightlights in the hallway begin to brighten, exactly as if something was walking. Because of how she set up the lights, we saw something we hadn't before. Whatever was casting the shadow paused into the halfway down the hallway. The lights wavered. The thing was swaying back and forth, as if deciding which way it wanted to move. I had sat up by this point to see the full hallway. From the reflection of the lights, I could catch a glimpse of my girlfriend's eyes, We watched the show in front of us, and then all of the lights dimmed before flickering back to normal. Whatever it was, the left disappeared. The two of us never fully figured out what was the best way to describe the vanishing act of something that we could not see in the first place. We started down the hall for what felt like minutes. Whether we were willing the reappearance or the continued absence of is debatable and possibly different between the two of us. But there was some energy traveling down the hall between us through our eye lines. I shivered despite the sweat beading up along my forehead. I assumed that the same was happening to her, but neither of us dared to go down the hallway that night. Whether the thing was there or not, we were too scared to attempt fate. Instead, we stared down the hallway until the sun rose. Nothing happened during the next couple nights. I thought that was worse. She was happy to know that nothing moved down the hall and into our bathroom. Eventually, she bought more of the light-sensitive nightlights and put them throughout the apartment. Just walking through what had been my girlfriend's home was now a light show. I took to wearing sunglasses inside to deal with all the light changes. My girlfriend was happy with the increased light. She had told me too often that I liked the dark too much and needed more light in the apartment. By the time 2 weeks passed with no incident, she had started talking as if she wanted the phenomenon or entity, whatever it truly was, to return. She stayed up in anticipation, stayed up in the light-flooded haze of dread. I started seeing my light fluctuations during the day, but that could have been my own sleep deprivation playing tricks on me. I knew not to trust my eyes. Just walking down the street, I would see the sun brighten and dim. Then the traffic lights would brighten and dim. Then my dashboard would brighten and dim. My girlfriend's wish eventually came true. We were both in bed, but I was not asleep. I saw the nightlights in the hallway brighten, and I knew what was coming. Through the hallway, into the room, paused by the bed, her side, as if it knew who was summoning it. Then to the bathroom. By the time it made it to the bathroom, my girlfriend had woken up, and there was a strange smile crossing her face. I didn't know what scared me more, her smile or the light signaling something was walking the apartment. The bathroom nightlight faded, and again, the bedroom lights started brightening. More importantly, the lights by her side of the bed brightened. Her eyes turned full black, as if something was blocking her irises from the lights. She gasped. I shot out of bed and over her into the empty space between her and the brightening nightlights. All I felt was intense cold. So intense that I fell to the ground with my muscles cramped. She gasped again. Then the lights moved out of the bedroom down the hall, and I could feel the ambient heat returning to my body by the time the last nightlights in the hall brightened. Then all the lights returned to normal. By the time we lived there for 4 years, the visits were happening weekly. They always had a lingering presence along with whatever side of the bed she was sleeping on. The rare nights that I slept through the visit, and very rare those nights were, I would wake up with scratch marks along my arm and blood stains on the bed. Those days she woke up happier than usual. As we approached what would be our last year together, I started sleeping less. Partially for my health, my arms were so scratched from the nights I crashed that I wondered how many folks assumed that they were track marks, and partially wondering what my girlfriend was getting from this entity. By By this time, light-sensitive nightlights had been placed throughout the house. I flinched when a cloud covered the sun at the change in light. Flashing lights at street signals started to paralyze me. Moving through the apartment was a cavalcade, however the hell you pronounce that one word. Bright and dim, and the pattern burned into my retinas so deeply I could continue to see outside the apartment. With the difference in sleep patterns, of course our relationship was on the rocks. I started blaming the nightlights, and her fascination was this thing she seemed to be inviting to our living space. Things came to a head one night. I waited until she was asleep before unplugging all the nightlights and plunging the apartment back into glorious darkness. The immense wave of stress and exhaustion hit me. As I pulled the last power strip of the lights out, I just crashed into the floor and slept the soundest I've ever slept. She was furious next morning. We started taking turns sleeping in other people's houses. Then when we both slept together, the nightlights would be on. I would wear a sleep mask as a compromise. She did at least remove some nightlights. On the nights that I was at other people's houses, I would see a nightlight flickering in the hallway. That's just so you can find your way to the bathroom if you need to get up in the middle of the night, the host would say. I would stare at that light all night long. Sometimes I would swear it would brighten it even if there was no light sensor on it. It was always cold when the light shifted in intensity. Our last night together still haunts me. I can sense the events happening right now as I think about it. We were at a full moon with a cloudless night that revealed more stars than usual. Even without the nightlights on, we could clearly see the room and hallway. This illumination just made our first revelation that much clearer, for we saw power strips being plugged in, and we heard the extra nightlights we had taken away being plugged in, and we saw those same lights brighten. But this time there were two sections. Had there always been two? The few times I've let myself think about it, I could never come to a clear conclusion. But that night, there were definitely two entities working together. They plugged in more lights and eventually plugging in nightlights around our bed, which immediately brightened. She gasped at the same mixture of fear and pleasure I had heard for the past 2 years. I felt a grip around my arms. I was being pinned down, and despite what I knew to be bright lights all around the room, all I could see was intense darkness and intense cold enveloped my body and emanating from the grips on my arms. As the grip tightened, the darkness took shape. To describe the indescribable is an exercise in futility. I've tried multiple times to remember the specific shape, but it shifts in my memory and fluidly shifting from a humanoid to insect to bird to rock to an amorphous blob. All I knew, I was staring at a shadow. The shadow of whatever it was that had triggered all the lights in my house. Puncture marks appeared on my arms, poked open by the nails or claws of this shadow. The cold coming from the grip seeped through the puncture marks and froze my muscles. I was unable to move, even though my eyes were frozen to ever-shifting shadow in front of me. I knew there had to be a light in this room. I could hear the buzzing of nightlight bulbs as though they fought to shine through the darkness. Whatever I knew, my eyes only saw that pure absence of light. In this trance of frozen space, there is no sense of self, no sense of time, no sense of boundaries. I liked it. Infinite darkness. Eventually I was let go. Despite the darkness dissipated. The power strips were pulled out out in the apartment and felt empty again. I must have gasped because my girlfriend turned to me and said, "You too?" My eyes adjusted to the nightlights around me. Dancing, the shadows floated throughout our bedroom. I watched them as they merged and split, reminding me of videos of amoebas surrounding and engulfing prey and then splitting into two. All of these shadows carried a horrendousness about them. The sight of monsters forever fighting around us was now open to our eyes. "Aren't they beautiful?" she said. And the floating monsters around her face transformed in her visage to a sight that only reappears in nightmares. No amount of darkness can erase that image. No amount of darkness is worth seeing in the light. I left the next morning, and within the week, I wrote over the rental agreement to her name, eventually finding a smaller studio with few outlets. Of course, I left the nightlights with her. I'm adamant whenever anyone comes over that lights stay off at night. And while I have felt the presence or something lurking through in the studio apartment, the cold no longer comes with it. The grip no longer comes with it. That darkness no longer comes with it. Most importantly, the sight of these monsters floating monsters no longer comes with it. If we meet and you come to my house, eventually you'll ask me why it's so dark in my house. I may say I'm sensitive to light or that I've always enjoyed the darkness. But if you mention this post, then I'll give you the truth. It's easier to sleep with the possibility of monsters in the dark than lie awake staring at them, at their shadows in the lights. That is the end of the story. Hope you enjoyed it.